Good morning, Ashish. It's wonderful to be here. I'm just thrilled to be part of the Sharing Our Knowledge Conference, and I just want to thank everybody who has organized, Peter Metcalf for his great enthusiasm in recruiting all of us to come, Alice Tapp, and I know there's been so many people putting the conference together. I want to introduce myself. I'm Bunn-Maracuse. I'm a settler scholar, originally from Hawaii, but not from Hawaii. I work in Seattle at the University of Washington in the art history department, and also at the Burke Museum, where I'm the curator of Northwest Native Art and the director of the Bill Holmes Center for the Study of Northwest Native Art. I'm not going to be talking about the Bill Holmes Center today, but it is our 20th anniversary year. We have grants for artists and community members to come and spend time in the collection. So if you want to know more, ask me about that. And also Ashley, who is here, she also works for the Bill Holmes Center and the Burke Museum. I work on the lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot, and all the shared waters and lands of those people. And I feel responsible to all the communities whose cultural heritage is kept in the collections at the Burke Museum, and we very much, like Jacqueline from the Sheldon Jackson Museum said today, want to be a resource for anyone. So if you come through Seattle, get in touch and we'll help you come in and visit with all of the wonderful cultural belongings from your community. I also want to acknowledge that this presentation is about education and teaching, but it's really kind of about the field of art history broadly, and from the perspective of being an educator at a university where we do have Indigenous students, but they are a small population. And I think the things I'm saying are geared towards both those students in our classrooms and the identification and the reassurance it feels to have some of your own language in the classroom, but also the broad audiences that are mostly non-native students, the settler visitors to our museums, and all those Northwest Coast art enthusiasts who read the books and the publications that we put out. So I know that today here we're standing on the land of the Sheldon Jackson School, but we're standing in a place where Tlingit education has been in place since time immemorial, but also that there were many generations of schooling here on this site that was damaging and detrimental to Tlingit language and to culture and to the preservation of that. And I'm just really honored to be a part of a generation now that is working to put all of that behind us and to work and move forward into healing and language regeneration and all of the good work that's going on now. So I'm sure that you've heard over the years, maybe if you read art history kind of things, this phrase, we have no word for art in our language. It comes up again and again and again. But we also know that there are actually lots and lots of words for art and art forms and art making in all of the Indigenous languages. Ishmael Hope wrote an essay called Tlingit Art in 2020, and he writes, quote, "Well, the Tlingit people never had a word for art. Europeans never had a word for atu either." So I'm here to talk about what I see as a need to learn and use Indigenous language words in scholarship, in university classrooms, in museums and publications. And I want to be really clear. I am not an expert in Indigenous languages. I'm not a linguist. I don't know more than a handful of words in most of the languages from the coast. I have had a couple of years of training in Kwakwala, but I'm not a linguist. I'm an art historian and a writer and a curator. And I hope that what I say today can just be a start of conversations for those of you who are interested in joining in this conversation. And last night, my heart was really filled at the warming of the hands to hear so much language being used. And I know that that's not the case in other parts of the coast. It's just so impressive to see how many people are speaking so much language and to stand here in a classroom and a school clearly filled every day with the language. So that is wonderful. And because we know that Tlingit and all the Indigenous languages are filled with that wisdom and that knowledge that it holds that helps to understand the ways of knowing for current and future generations. I know many of you are involved in language revitalizations as teachers or learners or speakers, and you are the ones with the language knowledge. And my hope is that some of that beauty and richness and specificity, those specific ways of cultural knowing that are really embedded in Indigenous languages can be revealed and respected if we use more language in our university classrooms, museum exhibits, publications. So the place that I'm speaking from today is my work as an educator at the University of Washington and that kind of university classroom and the Burke Museum. So there should be time. I hope we can have some conversation at the end here. So this is just kind of the first steps in a larger, what I hope to be a very collaborative journey to shed light on the power of words. And I'm inviting us all to think about those sort of illuminating perspectives we get when Indigenous language terms are centered in our classrooms, but also the harms that can ensue when English language translations really eclipse those original context and relationships. And I'm hoping that this is somewhat of an intervention into those colonial legacies of language persecution. So I'm proposing kind of two paths, two possible routes to follow in my wonderings about this concepts, which I'm calling lost in translation or placed in relation. So on the lost in translation path, the robust contextual relationships of words or phrases, that we have in the originating language, those can really be diminished when we translate to English. And the English often erases the particularities of function and context. And come on in, there's lots of seats, come on in. There's a few up here at the front, come on in. So what I'm suggesting is that when we're using our English language words for certain art forms, we get sort of misleadingly reassured that we already know something about those creations, about those belongings, because we know the English words. But instead, if we insist on the Indigenous language word priority, then as non-native speakers, we have to confront our intrusion into that Indigenous space. We have to recognize that we don't know. We're ignorant of what we should know, and we have to have sort of a place of humility rather than starting from this place of, oh, I know that English word, so I must know something about this creation. For instance, button and blanket, right? Common English words, neither of which bring to mind the real ceremonial role of a button blanket. For those of you who wear button blankets, usually that phrase brings to mind all of the important ceremonial and cultural aspects. But for students who don't have that experience, those two words don't lend any of that importance or heft to the word. But in our classroom, if I can start with the Gopala word, kamiktola, meaning a place to sew things on, and stick with that term, we can recognize, like linguistically, that a place to sew things on, right? That linguistically marks the transformation of a commercial wool blanket into a piece of regalia through the effort and the artistry of the women who gathered the buttons and the beads and adorn them with designs that connect the wearer to their inherited prerogatives. Come on in, this is it. So to that end, on the placed in relation path, if you center, as I try to do in my classes, Indigenous language terms for art and aesthetics, names for creations or words as they were made in their original context, the aim is to employ those words to reconnect artworks with the context that surrounded them before they left their homelands through theft or sale or trade, or how they're recontextualized in museum exhibits or English language publications. So I'm curious what relationships are revealed when artworks are reconnected to their original names. How is their original context illuminated? So I propose placed in relation as an art historical methodology centering Indigenous languages, supporting Indigenous language revitalization and regeneration with special attentions to the lexicons of art and aesthetics. There's a couple of chairs over here. Would you come in? And we could pull some. Someone needs chairs as they come in. Try not to drop it. So, I want to give just a few examples today of these kind of paths, which are, totally intertwined with our daily living and working and writing in English. So I'm going to attend first to like a word that might be easily translated. So drum, right? Drum allows us to all presume some common understanding of a percussive instrument. But if we use the indigenous word for an object like a drum, we get insights into some functional context. So in Kwakwa, the drum is called manatsi. And atsi is a suffix that suggests a container. Atsi is a container, so ikpaoma atsi is a fruit bowl. But wood atsi is your refrigerator, the container of cold. So that atsi has this kind of verb-like capacity. So the word manatsi, for drum, we might translate that as a container for rhythm, right? Suggesting this sort of dynamic capacity for the holding energy of the rhythmic potential waiting to be unleashed when the drum is struck. So doesn't that, for me, that totally changes my conception of the word drum, right? So once we're aware of these English translations or approximations of words that kind of bypass the whole indigenous way of knowing, we want to be really wary of using English very unreflexively in our writings or our teachings. So, game show style. I'm going to do this with my students. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to say two words, and I want you to think about a third word that seems to be in relation with those two. So the words are curtains and aprons. What comes to mind?
Fabric.
Fabric.
Strings.
Covering.
Coverings.
Flowing.
Those strings
Sewing.
that you pull.
Strings.
Yeah.
Hanging.
Flowing.
Flowing. Use a
Protective.
kitchen. Yeah, so a lot of my students say housewife, ironing. So, what disservice am I doing when we use the word apron and curtain, right? We have this incredibly different interpretation of both English and also very gendered, rather than using their Nchana or Kwakwa words, right? How do we bridge that gap from curtain to the deep spiritual and historical importance of the Nchana word, right? Whose dynamic role in ceremony includes connecting generations through this visual representation of genealogy and the encoding of rights to Hakuthli, the chiefly territories, right? So in my classes, for instance, using Tlingit words as much as possible, discuss the many of the clan treasures from your community. So Nora Marks Dowenauer wrote that in part the word atu, and I apologize for any mispronunciations. She wrote, quote, "It's a fundamental concept in Tlingit culture and basically means something that you own." So she has her 1995 wonderful essay, Tlingit Atu, Traditions and Concepts. And she doesn't provide a single English language translation for that word. Instead, she invites the reader to sort of enter into these stories about the accounts of individual Atu and the context and protocols that have to be in place to render that thing or that person Atu. So by avoiding using the word treasure, or what other kind of simple English gloss she could use, she doesn't. And then my student, I always start every quarter with this essay, because then they start to use that term and they don't expect an easy English term. They have to start from a place of, I don't know, and this thing is not the same as just a piece of art that I might see in a case at a museum, right? So I think we should be similarly inclined to use all the original names whenever we can, right? We don't all speak all the indigenous languages, our students don't speak them, but what names could we use, right? We don't ever expect to get to know a person without knowing their name, right? I cannot have a relationship with you until I say, who are you and what is your name? And how can we expect them to have a relationship with these things in their scholarship, in their work, in their world, if they do not know their names? So one way that I hope to pursue this language-centered art historical inquiry in collaboration with many other people, because this is what it will take, is to search out and work with people who are working on aesthetic vocabularies in their own languages. The poet and linguist Robert Bringhurst suggested that there was no aesthetic discussion among artists on the Northwest Coast, only the doing of the art. So he wrote, quote, "I found no word for art per se in Haida. I found no word for form line either. These things, it seems, were not discussed, but they were performed," unquote. I think that's wrong. It really dismisses the capacity for artistic discussion and reflection in Haida and across the coast. And we know the reasons, for all the language disruption. I don't need to go into that with this audience. Haida curator Nika Collison argues that there were highly specific Haida vocabulary for carving, and I have some of the words that she has shared in her publications here. And she notes that in Haida there are many words to describe the creations of the things that we call art, right, for weaving and painting. And also to describe the aesthetic achievements in art, like the carving of a fine lines on a bracelet. I mean, obviously, if there were cedar bark templates for all these form line shapes, there were words for all of them, right? Pass me that. No, not that, not that. Obviously, there were words for all of them. So these precise terms, they really testify to a depth of artistic and aesthetic reflection in a culture that had specialized lexicons for making art in various media and discriminating vocabularies for artistic skills. The form of the art was discussed. So recently, the Haida brothers, Gwai and John Edenshaw, have been creating new words in Haida for the terms that Bill Home coined in 1965 for the form line shapes. And Gwai Edenshaw says that Home's vocabulary was and is in some ways still indispensable. They couldn't have grown the art where it was without it. But now it's time for Haida to bring these words back, either older words that still might be known, or to bring out new words that make sense, ones that have grounding in Haida linguistics and reflect Haida concepts of relation or aesthetics. So the form that Home called the ovoid, that's often used in eyes and joints of animals, that shape can be an old Haida word, they say, hunskul, meaning socket form. And as Gwai and Jalan work to find old words or create new words in Haida for all the form line elements, Gwai says they prioritize any old term they can find, and they work to find new forms that are succinct but appropriate. And a new term should express something fundamental about the shape. So in Haida, objects are given shape classifiers, part of the linguistic grammar of the language, depending on the dimensionality of the object, right? Is it long and flat? Is it dish-like? Is it round? Is it spherical? So a particularly important new word that they've focused on might replace Holmes' U form, right? And U form is based on a letter in the English language, so that's not super appropriate. And they said kunju, explaining that, quote, they write, as a shape classifier, kun can describe a whale's fin, a bump in the road, a point of land, the nose on your face. It describes any object that comes off of any other body. And it describes an intrinsic property of the U form. However, it's always referential. It does not live in the art, it does not float, it rises off the line, unquote.
Excellent.
So they have these efforts to ground aesthetic creations in their own language, to move beyond the placeholders that Bill Home described, that he used to describe northern form line. And people are doing this on the southern coast as well.
Yes.
So Luke Marston, and I thank Megan Smetzer for bringing this to my attention. Luke Marston has been working with Halkominam speakers on the words for Coast Salish design elements as well. He had a 2021 MFA thesis in which he discusses Halkominam words about carving and color and Salish forms. And he writes, quote, the focus of this fieldwork was to explore the beliefs and philosophy of the art and the eyes through Halkominam speaking people, to further understand the contrasts of contemporary art and traditional pre-contact artistic concepts. So he's bringing out some of these words. And we have as well at the University of Washington, I have a master's student who's been learning Lushootseed for the last 3 years, and they are working on connecting Lushootseed terminology to the Salish wool weavings that exist, and the names for weavers, and all the ways that language can help us unpack the understanding of the formal elements and the meanings and the uses of these creations. And I know from just a couple of years in Kwakwa classes that I have really expanded my own insights into ways of understanding the world, and to also seeing that those English translations are just these very shallow glosses of meaning. I feel like, you know, I've been working with Kwakwa art for 30 years, and just a couple of years of Kwakwa, it felt like, you know, we opened the window this much, it's like Wizard of Oz, everything's in color on the other side, and you realize how dim your understanding has been so far. So I know many of you here are deeply or even tangentially involved in language learning. And there isn't a sense that if we're talking about art history and art history graduate or undergraduate programs for Indigenous art, it's very, very rare to require students to learn Indigenous languages. Most programs still require you to learn French, German, Italian. We're changing that. University of Washington, Indigenous languages are highly encouraged or required, and they're bringing more Indigenous language possibilities of learning Lushootseed and others. My students are learning Lushootseed and Uchama. And even on the undergraduate level, to bring in some of the Indigenous language terminology in the classroom really, I think, radically alters students' relationships to the artworks. And it helps them reflect also on their own sort of position, who they are, what their responsibilities are. And so I encourage my students, if at all possible and appropriate, to think about what that means. Even language learning on a basic level. A year or two of language is not going to give you any kind of mastery, but it does provide cultural insights that then allow you to ask totally different questions in your art historical research. Ones that don't stem from Eurocentric or Western paradigms of art history, but really center relationships and priorities that are set by the community. It just builds up those understandings of respect and reciprocity that I think are essential to historians, and accountability, right? You have to go back to where the communities are, you're working with them, you're standing up and telling them what are the latest projects, what's your research. So this short paper is just a very small step on a journey to discuss the form and function of Northwest Coast artworks and how English and Indigenous language terms can either limit or enhance our understanding of those creations. But really to follow through on this journey, I think it's certainly a collaborative one where we need to bring together Indigenous artists, language speakers, linguists, to shed insight into how language really opens up the understanding of the art. I think that working together, and I'm looking for people who might want to work together, it's possible to shed light on how those constituent parts of Indigenous languages and worldviews come together to reveal information and shed light on what is either lost in translation or with an eye towards placing it back in relation. So those are my thoughts, and I'm happy to hear from all of you too. Yes.
I'm sorry that I was late. Maciek asked me to come over and introduce you. Oh, very nice. Yes, I'm part of sharing our knowledge conference, and your name is Katie Bunn-Maracuse. Maracuse.
Yes.
Yeah, well. I guess I would say that, are there any questions?
Excellent. Would you like to start with your question?
Yes. Well, actually, more or less, it's not really a question. It's more or less collaboration with, when I'm looking at this summer, I had the distinct opportunity to work with James Crippen Zeusch and Kadashkaha, Ben Jackson. And we worked with a graduate out of McGill University, Zlata, at Odervisk. I can't even say her name. She's Ukrainian, and she is looking at the similarities and differences between the Ukrainian language and the Tlingit language. So I see that you have featured Khadkil and Shkmalyach here, and this is wonderful. In Tlingit, James, also we went out around, and some of the islands around Wrangell are not named, and some of them are. They're in Thornton's book, or they're in, But we went around and looked at all of these things, and also he wanted to know, because they're carving a totem pole with T.J. Young, Karshan pole, Haska Hwedi. I always get that one wrong. It's a raven pole, and then they're going to continue on with Bear Up the Mountain. However, he was looking, so they went down there and were trying to learn the names of the carved knife, the tlita, and the ads, even though it's kuta. But he is doing exactly what you said, and I really love seeing your trigon shape as like an arrowhead or the crescent, because I was wondering about that. Listening to you here has shed a really big light on it for me, because I couldn't write as fast as James, but I recorded him doing this with Mr. Jackson.
Excellent.
So this is wonderful.
It's exactly, I think there are people asking these questions and doing this work in little pockets here and there, and I would love to put together a consortium, a conference, a workshop, a roundtable, whatever it is, just so that we can get in conversation with each other all across the coast. And as we were told this morning, right, we gotta all lift each other up and work together. And I think there's really great potential for projects like these. Any other question or comment? I don't want to take the room for too long from our next speakers.
Can we do a copy of that that you were reading from?
Sure, yes, I would be happy to share a copy with anyone who wants to. I get you my email address.
Just a comment. I'm really glad I walked over here and saw it, because I'm curious about our organization, Global Heritage Foundation, has been working with birth speakers, and one of the things that we've been chasing with the birth speakers in Kone is words for farmline, for artwork, for the shapes. Working with several birth speakers to either recover or make new words, like Kakasha'a made a new word for formline and Tlingit now. And I'm really excited. I would love to partner. We actually just got awarded a grant to teach language through traditional arts. And now we're like, how are we going to do it when we're using words like U-shape?
And I will say, I grew up with Bill Holm and his family. I now run the Bill Holm Center for Study Northwest Coast Art.
Wow.
He would be thrilled, right? This is a wonderful thing, and this is the way it should be. And if those, he was looking for those terms. Had he found them, he would have put them in the book. And so the fact that you are already on the road to this is great. And anything I can do, and I'd be happy to talk more about it. Anything we can do at the Burke Museum and other ways of bringing archives together out.
We would love to, and Aktengun Shishra, are we supporting our Seattle classes now?
Absolutely.
So if anyone else wants to partner, it's hard to miss me.
I think it's,
I'm just wondering if we look you up at UW in the faculty, will we find some links that, if we don't get this paper, but can you?
You'll find my email address. I'm the only one with the
perfect.
last name Bunn-Maracuse in the world. So
Okay.
and you can find.
Because I hear there's this thing called the internet that we can use.
If it's around.
Internet, then you can find it.
Okay. But it's cheap.
Yeah. Cheese, everyone.
Cheese.